Well, today's agenda, we're going to review what PaaS is a little bit. What are the benefits for Azure Web Apps and App Services in general as well. Then I'm going to be jumping into the Azure portal to do a little bit of hacking to see how that works. We're going to be deploying a web app on App Services. We are going to go through the portal and what are the features and options that we have for App Services. We're going to deploy a web application on containers running on Linux. We're going to set up autoscale. We're going to be playing with deployment slots and what that is, and also doing some testing in production. It's a feature included in Azure Web Apps. Of course, you can interrupt me at any time to ask questions, and then at the end we will review some general use cases for architectures and how you can adopt app services and how you can use it, including with other services in Azure.
Louis, what's the acronym PaaS stand for?
PaaS stands for Platform as a Service. So if you look into this side, you will see what are the different ways of hosting an application. So the traditional one is on premises. And here we can see a list of responsibilities that either you or Azure will be responsible of. So of course, on premises, you are responsible for everything, right? Then when you make the move into the cloud, you can leverage different technologies. In here, IaaS stands for Infrastructure as a Service. And what that means is basically virtual machines. And in Azure, Microsoft or Azure is responsible for the virtualization, the server, the storage, and networking. And you'll be responsible in a VM for managing the operating system, patching, and all that stuff, right? Now, in Platform as a Service, which is the one of the feature or the topic that we're going to be talking about, in here you can see that Azure is responsible for more than previously. We're responsible for the operating system, the middleware, and the runtime. However, you're still responsible for the actual application and the data that the application is using. And in Software as a Service, that basically Azure will be responsible for everything. And so the difference here is the more to the left, the more options or the more ways that you can personalize your applications. And more to the right is you have more constraints. You are less open to play with them or to customize your applications. But the benefits for that is that you're also not responsible for all that, all these other layers and things that are required for your application. I'm not going to be throwing a lot of marketing material and all that stuff. This is actually just one slide. This is a study done by Forrester. It was a study based on their Microsoft request, but it was directly done by Forrester to Microsoft customers. And in general, under that study, you can look for it actually on the internet. The customers in general mentioned that by using PaaS, they save IT time around 80%. And that's more related to the way that you need to deploy applications and the people that are responsible for managing deployments, errors when you do manual deployment and something doesn't work and you have to troubleshoot and things like that.
And when you say IT time, that's people.
People time, yeah.
And
people time.
To what?
Compared to doing it, doing IaaS or VMs specifically, not using app services per se. Again, 50% deployment because you can integrate your whole pipeline for deployment without having to having a person actually doing the deployment. All can be done on a DevOps manner. And in general, well, return on investment, according to the study, on the price that you pay for the technology for the usage of the platform versus how much you can save. And that is because, as you will see, depending on events, you can scale the infrastructure. But if you don't need it anymore, you can scale in as well. So that way, you will only be using the infrastructure that you need in the way that you need it for. Some of the benefits of using app services. So this is not only for Microsoft technology. You can deploy you can deploy .NET applications, JavaScript applications, Java, Docker, as I mentioned. You can work with Windows and Linux. So there's a mode for you to deploy specifically on Linux OS or Windows operating systems. We have staging and deployment. That is, you're going to be seeing something that is called deployment slots. So you can have not only the actual deployment of the application, but also creating deployment slots where you can deploy different versions and then test them out. And if you think that you got it right, you can then promote those and do swapping. We're going to be doing all that on the portal. What I mentioned about testing in productions, once you have, let's say, deploy your version 1, and then you have a new version deploy as well, and you want to forward traffic, let's say 5% only to the new version, you can do that as well. You can that is called testing in production, and we will see that as well on the on our demo. You can deploy application galleries, so if there are already options for you to deploy, let's say, content management system without you to go into the hassle and set up Drupal or things like that, you can go through the marketplace and just deploy all that with a click of a button. As I mentioned, auto-scaling, that's very important. High availability, you can reduce operations costs because you can do CI/CD very good integrated with app services. Backup and recovery. And for enterprise grade features, we have, well, a global data center footprint, because you can deploy this not only on one region, you can mix this with other features like Traffic Manager, where you can deploy an instance of app service, let's say, on different regions, and through Traffic Manager route them to the appropriate region that will give you the best performance as well. It has a hybrid support. What this means is that even when you're deploying a PaaS service, you can connect them with your own VNets, this goes to what Andres was mentioning. And also you can connect, if you have a connection like a VPN or ExpressRoute, you can go all the way to on-premises with connectivity with your front end on PaaS services and accessing the backend data through all that hybrid connection. You can leverage also Azure Active Directory if your application doesn't have security and you don't want to develop the whole security aspects of it, and you want to use what you have in Azure, which is Azure Active Directory. You can integrate with that. And last but not least, the security and compliance, which is important. The Azure Apps, actually I have something that I wanted to show you here in regards to security and compliance. There is a site that if you guys, I don't know if you're aware of this, but if you go to aks.ms Azure Compliance, is a shortcut. This will take you to a site where you can download an official document. This document, it's updated, I believe, monthly. And if I click on this, this is going to give you all of the compliance on all of the Azure platform and services. And so in this document, if you go, it'll explain you all the different certifications that Azure has, but what I wanted to show you is at the bottom. You will have two appendices. One is for Azure Government specifically. I'm trying. Appendix B is for Azure Government Services, and the first portion of it is for the regular commercial platform. And if we go all the way to the top and we look for App Services, we can see in general what are the certifications that App Services have. And so if you want to use the PaaS services to create an application that, let's say, you want it to be PCI, DSS compliance for financial services, or if you're doing something on the health sector, or you want SOC compliance, Here you can see all the different certifications that App Services already has. Okay, so I think we're now going to be jumping to the portal. Yep. I guess you already have played a little bit on. I'm not sure how familiar are you guys with the Azure portal. A little bit, not so much. To create an app service, we can head to. There are different ways. You can search here. You can click on the on the top here on the icon, and it will pop up the menu. You can click on the Create Resources. If you do it that way, if you go to Web, you will see all the different resource types that we can create. In here, what we're going to be creating is a web app. And it's a little bit small. Anyways, so this is the main window to create our app service. And although while we can just create the app service like this, what I want to do is let's say I wanna upload an actual application. So let's start where everything happens, which is the IDE. This is a small Python. Yeah, sure.
Does access to create web apps require its own license or subscription, or does it come with anything like an Enterprise 5 or anything like that?
With E5 not separate, you need your subscription to be able to deploy all of that. You need an Azure subscription.
Okay.
You need a free subscription, free account, or you get like $100 in the free account.
Yep.
Do you have a URL for the free account?
No, but if I guess if you go just to the Azure portal, shouldn't that?
I just signed up for it. It says you're not eligible for the Azure free.
You already had one.
You can use a pay-as-you-go, but for Azure Web Apps, there is a free one
There's
for
a free SKU.
developers.
Yeah.
It's very limited in compute time and stuff, but it is there.
Yeah, and you can't use your own domain. You got to use the Microsoft domain
Yes,
that
that's
is assigned.
Custom domain. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it helps you just for you to play with it and see how the development process is. Okay, so what I was mentioning, this is a Python application. I'm not a Python developer at all. I do C#, JavaScript, and I consider myself an F# Padawan, trying to be better on that, but definitely not a Python user so far. But that's not a problem. What I'm going to do here is I have this Python application, and I also have a Docker file, which I'm going to basically. Anyways, one question: are you guys familiar in general with Docker and containers and what that's all about? Okay, so what I have here is, as I mentioned, is just a Python application. So if I do Docker build, let's name this with Python, and let me see if I remember my commands. What am I missing? Of course, the tag. So I already have Docker installed on my machine. I'm creating an image for this application.
Now that terminal, is that running on Azure?
No, right now I'm running everything on my machine. I'm gonna test it on my machine, and then I'm going to upload the image to a container registry. A container registry is a way where you will store your images for containers. And we have one of those running in Azure. It's something like Docker Hub, but a private version for that.
Can you customize this Docker file, like creating like
multiple services and dependencies in between them like that? Or is there some?
So in general, on the container world, you try to, when you're doing microservices, each container will do just one specific work, and usually you need more than one container to do to host your application. On app services, there's a preview version right now where you can do multi-container, I believe. But right now, the stable and the usual way to deploy to app services is just a single container, and not your app services on containers is not an orchestrator like Kubernetes, for instance, where you can select multiple containers and lay out the whole architecture for the whole application. In this scenario, I'm going to be deploying just a single app, and every instance of the app service, when it scales, it will contain the same thing that I deploy in just one instance. So what I'm going to be doing now is just to prove that this runs on my machine. So the application exposes the port 9000 internally, so that's what I'm going to be running, and this was called with Python. And I believe I have everything here. And I believe I missed something, so let's see if this... Oh, I forgot the rocket run command. You're correct. Okay, so now the application is running locally. And let's test it out just to make sure. Okay, so this is the Python application. So now that I have it running locally, what I'm going to do is, as I mentioned, I'm going to upload this to an Azure Container Registry. The Container Registry is not a dependency for app services per se. It's more of what is on the containerized world. That's what you use to store your images, and also to distribute and pull those images to deploy on your application. So let me go here. This is my Azure Container Registry. This is where I'm going to be uploading the actual image. And so when the way you upload your image, you create a tag for so I'm gonna tag the container that I created, which is this name. I'm gonna add another tag. It's basically like putting an alias on the name of the container, and here I'm just setting up the tag for the web Python to the whole FQDN of my Azure Container Registry, and then the name of the container, and I can also include a specific version for that. What happened? Let's do that again. What happened? I'm going to try to. Okay, so I just created an alias for that, and now I'm going to upload this to my Azure Container Registry. think it did. Something went wrong here.
So, but every time you put one up, you change the version number of it?
Yes, every time you upload a container, you should create a new version of it, and when you reference the deployment, you should specify the actual version, and we're going to be doing that when I deploy this.
But if you're deploying all these versions, are the previous versions still there?
Yes.
How do you inventory it?
On the container registry, you can have policies, for instance, that when you have certain images that you have without them being pulled or being requested, you can run a process there to
clean them out.
To clean them out. Yes.
Okay, but how would you inventory the differences? You'd have to keep track manually, correct? Or is there some way to with tagging?
For containers, you wouldn't do this manually. This will be part of a DevOps or CI/CD process, so that when you push your code, let's say to your GitHub or whatever, or Azure DevOps, for instance, when you push any changes, that process with the branch or the actual version, you can use that as a reference for tagging the actual image or the container as well. Let me just see if the actual image was created correctly. Yep, it was created correctly. So I should be able to push that up.
I think last time you were tagged it, you didn't push it.
Yeah, I know it. It was. Okay, so the image is being pushed to my container registry, and if I go here and I look on the repos, and I just look for with PY, we can see that I can see the image, but also I can see the tags that I have uploaded. Right now I only have one tag. If I we're going to be a sample. We're going to be changing something and then creating a new tag version. As always in Azure, the basic thing that you need to deploy resources is a resource group. In here, I'm going to be creating a new resource group where we're going to be putting everything. I'm going to be giving, since this is going to be a web app and it's going to have an FQDN and it's going to be exposed to the internet, I'm going to select a globally unique subdomain. I'm going to specify that this is going to be a Docker container web app. I'm going to deploy this on East US. And I'm going to create a new service plan. And if you can look the different SKUs that you have, and if we go to dev testing, this is the actual free SKU that was mentioned before. But in this scenario, I'm going to be using a P1 V2 instance. It's going to give you 3.5 gigs of memory. This is the estimated cost per month. Some of the features that it includes is you can set up a custom domain as well. You can scale up to 20 instances, so it depends on the SKU how many instances that you can replicate and scale. You can have up to 20 staging slots, which is one of the features that we're going to be using in a moment. And also, what are the backups, traffic manager, and some of the other capacity that this SKU has. If you change the SKU, this is going to reflect what are the features that you have. So let's say if we go to the free we can see that it's only free, but you don't have none of the other features that we were seeing. Won't be able to scale or do any of that if you go to the on the free version. So that's why we're going to be choosing this one. So the next thing is that we're going to select, since this is going to be a Docker web application, it's going to be a single container. There's a preview on Compose, but for this demo, we're going to just go with a single container. And the image source, I'm going to be choosing Azure Container Registry. Docker has its own public registry, which is Docker Hub. But in this occasion, we're going to be using the private one.
What is the private registry?
A private registry, so you can create your own private registry. It's a service that you set up on whatever you want, and you give it a storage, and you basically can deploy on your own VNet or on a VM the same thing that you are seeing with the Azure Container Registry or a Docker Hub, but it's not going to be exposed. Now, the advantage of you leveraging the Azure Container Registry is that if you want to replicate all those images globally, and you want to, let's say that you have your data center in East US, but also you have in UK or Australia, you can deploy to just one, whatever Azure Container Registry that you want. You'll upload your image, and Azure will replicate that globally on the regions that you choose to replicate. And what that will do is that if you're deploying locally, you'll have better performance when you're scaling, because when you're scaling, it needs to pull the image for the container and create the new instance. So it's better for you that the container registry is closest to where you're deploying your actual infrastructure.
Benefits of private?
The benefits of private is only that it's private and you're going to manage it, and you can upload only your own containers, and it doesn't have to be publicly available. It doesn't have an internet-facing IP, basically. So here I should be able to see my application, and I can also select which tag I want to choose. In this occasion, I only have just one. Again, the container already has a startup command, but if I wanted to override how the application starts, I can also override those here. And that's basically it. So I'm just going to create.
I notice when I go to App Services and create a new one, the only thing that's available is a web app. Are there plans to have other services available?
So actually, right now, you can deploy web apps, but also you can deploy Azure Functions. I don't know if you're familiar with those. Azure Functions have two models to run on Azure. One is consumption plan, and what that does is behind the scenes is it's using the same technology, but you are not managing it. And when you're deploying functions in the consumption model, you'll get charged by execution. However, if you already have your own app service and you want to deploy a function, you may not need to go to the consumption model, because if you're already paying for your app service, you can deploy functions on the app service as well. So I think this is done. If we go to the resource, first of all, I want to show you the resource group. So when you deploy a web app, you can see that we have here a app service plan, and we have the web app that we created. The difference here is that the app service plan, it encapsulates the actual infrastructure that you're going to be using and that you chose to use, and that's where you're going to be running your web app. In this scenario, if I chose to deploy a function, I would see a function here as well, but the application will be running on the app service plan itself. I don't know if you guys
I think you can have multiple web apps
Exactly.
with the same service plan.
Exactly, you can have multiple web apps on the same service plan running, and what that means is that if you deploy more than one web app on the same app service, when that app service scales, it's going to bring all the other web apps as well. So you need to take that into account, that let's say if you have two applications running on the same web app, but it's only just one that is consuming all of the resources, and then it requires a scale because let's say that you choose to scale based on CPU consumption. When the new instance is created, it's also going to be having both web applications. So if you need them because those two web applications needs to be side by side, that's okay. But if you do not need that, then you should create a different app service plan per application.
What's the main difference between the function apps and the web apps other than infrastructure?
The web app is for you to deploy an actual application. You can deploy the whole, .NET Core, or you want to deploy Java or Python, but a full MVC type of application, let's say. In functions, you only deploy specific function execution. So it's not like you're not going to be using the whole MVC framework, for instance. You're going to be using the extensions for Azure Functions specifically. So let's go to the app that we deployed. In the overview, you're going to see a bunch of information. In here, you can see what I mentioned, what's the app service plan that this is actually using. But also you can see the URL, and if I just click on it, we see that the application is there, has been deployed, and is running. So I said that we were going to we have different settings in here. I'm just going to go through the demo. We're going to set up everything, and then after that, if we have enough time, I can go through each of these and explain what they do. So now that we have the application set up, I want to set up, have the ability to auto-scale. So when I go to Settings, Scale Out, I'm going to choose not a manual, because you can set up a manual count of instances, but what I want to do is to create a custom auto-scale rule that what it would do, I'm going to select that it's going to be scaled based on metrics. I'm going to add a rule that I'm going to be looking for, this is the app service that I chose. I'm going to be looking for the average consumption of CPU. And what I'm going to be looking for is the instance count. And if the CPU usage is greater than 70%, what I want to do is I want to increase by 1 count. The duration here is how far back in time I'm going to be looking for the metrics. In this case, I'm just going to be looking for the last 5 minutes in order to have this scale fast. And the cooldown is that once it scales, it's not going to be looking or reading again the metrics until 5 minutes, and then after that, it's going to look again for the average of CPU to see if it needs to scale up. So I'm going to be adding that. Now, I'm adding a scaling out, but I also want to scale in once the consumption of CPU is lower. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be leaving this as it is, but the operator, instead of being greater than, I'm going to be looking for less than, and let's see, 25%. And it's not going to increase, it's actually going to decrease, count by 1. So here what I have is set up that when the average CPU is above 70%, just add instances, and when the average CPU is less than 25, remove instances.
Quick question. So since you're doing this based off the app service plan, I'm assuming that means that if you had more than one container running in there, they would set the same rules for both of them. So everything that's in there is doing that. But could you also set rules specifically for each individual one instead of selecting ASP? Could you drop that down and use your web, whatever specific container that you have, like under resource?
You can have metrics for a specific container. However, if you have multiple containers running on that app service, if you scale based on just one container performance, since what you are going to be scaling is the app service as a whole, you will still get both containers when it replicates.
So you should make a second service plan.
If you don't want both containers running at the same time, because it may be that you have a container that is, that it has more than like a background job, a web worker or something like that. So it may be valid that you want both.
Just for scaling, if you have a separate service plan, can you scale them separately?
Yeah. This is the scaling rule is just for a single service plan. It's not for every instance of the service plans that you have.
So when you say average CPU percentage is greater than 70%, is that the average of all the instances together?
Is the average of the app service plan. So the app service plan, think of it as if it were a VM. So if the VM, the usage of the CPU goes above 70%, that can be
Of the whole VM?
of the whole VM. That can be because just one web app is eating the whole CPU, or it can be because you have two web apps and both of them are.
Or could it be somebody else's web app? Or
Well, no, it cannot be because you deploy that on your app service plan, so it's only your application, whatever you deploy.
so once that VM gets to 70%, then you get a new VM?
Yeah.
A new instance?
A new instance, exactly. So I'm gonna save this and start the test because it's gonna take like around about 5 minutes for it to scale.
While we wait question, so practical example for this auto scale, let's say for example you have load balancing on your web servers. Is this a practical example or not?
What's that?
App Service includes its own load balancer, so when it scales, you don't have to reset up anything. You'll still hit the same FQDN, but it will route you to whatever instance is available, depending on several things that we're gonna be touching actually.
I mean on physical, if you build an environment where you have load balancer, you have multiple web servers, is it similar to what you just described for the scalability or not?
I wouldn't put, so the app service already has its own load balancer. If you have multiple regions, let's say, with different app services, what you could use there instead of a load balancer would be something like a traffic manager, which is a load balancer based on DNS.
No, I'm talking about autoscaler. When it scales up, scales down, is it something that what you have to do manually when you see that, for example, the threshold over 70 in total, for example, your web services, web servers overloaded, and you just kickstart a new, for example, new VM or
Yeah, that's
physical environment.
on a physical. Yeah, if it's a physical environment, you need to set up your own load balancer and all that.
And in your case, is it just autoscalability up or down based on the CPU threshold?
Yeah, on this scenario, yeah, it can be. It doesn't have to be metrics for the VM. Like you can have, for instance, a queue, an Azure queue that, depending on the number of messages.
Response time or something.
Exactly. Actually, I think I didn't show that up, but let me. I want to start. I'll go back here. Just want to start. So the web app, what it does is that when I click on Start Work, it'll just spawn a thread just to consume the CPU cycles to force this to do the actual scale. So
I saw your web address there, so one of us could actually log into that and start another one, and
Yep.
and
Well,
see what happens. Right?
Yep.
Anyone brave enough to do that?
So I'm gonna start the work, and while this is running, I wanna show you the CPU. Where's the? Here it is. So if I go to the app service plan, it will show me some metrics. So it should start to pick up. What's 30 minutes? So let's give it a time while this is working. And while this, let me show you guys also the different. I chose CPU time, but you have data in, data out, disk queue length, HTTP queues. And these are the metrics for the app service plan, but you can also create, scaling out based on other not metrics, but custom logs. There are other features like Azure Monitor or Log Analytics that you can use those to trigger the actual scaling as well.
Can you configure it for like specific times? So like if you know you're going to have a heavy load at 1 a.m. or whatever it is, that you can say from this time to this time scale up to this much automatically, so it's prepared for that load before it comes.
Yep, you beat me to that. So when you also here as well, what I did is I created the default scaling rule, but you can also have rules that, let's say, I'm gonna have a specific start time and end time. Let's say that it's, I don't know, it's you have a sales page or whatever, and it's Thanksgiving, and you wanna make sure that you're gonna be able to support the load, but after that you want to scale in. You can do that not based on a metric, but on a time specific. Yep, you can do that. So let me see if we can. So we see that it starts to increase the use of the CPU. It needs to have around 5 minutes of constant usage for it to scale. So it is important that even though the app service will help you to scale out automatically, you need to take into account that the scaling out is not like immediately, right? So that's why it's important for you to have proper monitoring of your application, understanding what's the behavior of your system in order to be prepared for that increase. Nonetheless, you can be sure that even so, if something happened that you are not expecting, that you can still prepare yourself to have the app service to auto scale automatically.
There's only one user on this right now running the app. So what difference does it make how many CPUs there are?
I think someone perhaps went in and clicked on the stop work, maybe.
Okay.
Oh no, it did not. No, they didn't. So it seems perhaps the chart. So sorry, what was the question?
If there was only one user and you set a CPU limit,
yeah,
and the thing used more than that, what's the point? If there's only one user running the app, what's the point of adding another CPU?
Well, in this scenario, I'm only consuming the cycles just to showcase the actual scaling, not because it has any meaningful purpose at all.
You're just creating traffic.
Yeah, I'm just creating the actual load on the CPU to simulate whatever the application is doing, supposedly.
Which is why I wanted someone else to also log in to see what would happen.
Okay.
What if you have to have faster reaction than 5 minutes? Let's say, for example, you have SLA and your users complain, and for 5 minutes, within 5 minutes, they can create huge traffic of complaints.
Then you need to be prepared because, yeah, I mean.
So there's no way to reduce the reaction time.
No, there's no way to reduce the reaction time on app services. If you have an application that, let's say, is using another set of technologies, like if you're running your own cluster, Kubernetes, then that's easy to grow. Also, if you're using Azure functions, that it's faster to grow as well. But I mean, the clouds give you infinite infrastructure, but in reality, I mean, you need to take into account what technologies that you're using and how fast it can react to the changes. So, yep.
So you brought a good example of loading it on, let's say, from AWS language to Lambda services that can scale out much faster. And in this case, you can architect your application so that you can have these webheads that are not CPU hungry, but auto scale your Lambda services if you need like a burst in your performance.
Yeah, the Lambdas are the Azure functions.
Yep. Yes, you can do that. I mean, when you're using Azure Functions in a consumption plan, you don't set up your app services, so it'll scale. It'll do that behind the scenes because Microsoft is managing all that infrastructure. But still, if you're doing app services, you need to take into account that time as well, because you can have spikes, but then traffic can also go down in less than 2 minutes, right? So it's hard for the platform if you're going to be creating new infrastructure just for it to be running 2 minutes and then just you don't need it anymore because it's just one spike, right? So you need to balance that out.
Can you put a budget so that it doesn't go hog wild?
Azure itself has a feature called cost management, and you can set up budgets not only for app services, but you can set up budgets in general for resource groups and things like that in the Azure platform. That can probably be a topic by itself on how to do proper Azure governance on set up your subscription policy, security, and cost management is a part of that as well. So let's see. I guess we still have one instance count. Well, what this is running, this is some of the information that you have on the auto scale. When the scaling out starts, you'll start seeing the operations in here. It'll list you out when it's doing scaling out or scaling in. You can also set up notifications so that when the actual app service needs to scale, either out or in, it can send you an email. But not only can send you an email, it can also integrate with webhooks, and it can send that information to a system or a webhook, and you can react to that. Let's say if you want to send that to a pager, or put that on Teams, or have a system react to that. The system can work with it as well. So that's what you can set up diagnostic logs. Diagnostic logs is a feature that most of the Azure resources have, and that's basically, it will gather data from whatever the application is doing, and you can store those logs into a storage account. You can send them to Log Analytics, or you can even send those to event hubs. And if you have other toolings that you have where you gather all those logging, you can send those logs to that as well.
You send it to SQL?
You should be able to send it to SQL. I don't know if we have a connector right now for dumping the logs to SQL, but you should be able to. I mean, because it will dump them into a event hub, and from there you can just pull those messages, whatever you want it. There are things that are already here in Azure, like Log Analytics, that will do that automatically for you. But if you want to do your own service or do it on, for instance, to Splunk, some of our customers do that already because they're using not Log Analytics but Splunk, and they can definitely integrate this with Splunk. There's already a connector actually that will pull the logs from Event Hub and send them to Splunk. So let's see. Okay, so now we see.
When I go to your service, I don't get the start work. I only get the stop work.
That may be because it's already running. Are you hitting the whole URL without the?
No, just the. And I ended it at .NET.
Okay, and maybe because it's already. I think the application sets up a global flag.
Are you guys on the same instance?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well,
Did you see the same thing?
I'm seeing stop work also.
Yep.
Yeah, it's, it's running.
Yeah.
It's
So
just an app,
if you
so it's
just
stopped
started
it,
stops it.
if you flipped it, you would probably see the update.
Yeah, or I could stop it.
Yeah.
And you'd have to start it again.
Yep.
Go back and forth.
Well, before you stop it, let me see what was. I wanted to see the metrics. Well, here it is. So maybe that's someone already did actually. So anyways, that's the auto scale. I'm gonna be moving with the deployment slot. Here what we have, it's basically another way that you can have a way for you to have another instance of your application running on the same app service. Right now I only have one deployment slot, which is the actual production, and it is what I'm running. So I'm going to create a separate one, and I'm going to name this stage. And the name for it, I mean, you can put whatever name you want it on this. A deployment slot will have its own FQDN, and the FQDN that it creates. So there we have it. So I'm going to click on this. As you can see, it has its own FQDN, which is the one that I had. Just it only has dash and the name of the slot that I chose. If I click on this, you should look in. It's basically the same application. So let's say that I'm going to do a change on my application, and what I'm going to do is something that is just for it to be noticeable. What I'm doing is just adding a background color to the whole web page. And again, I'll do a Docker build. Let's tag this 0. Again, if I were to have a DevOps process, all this will be running at the moment that you do git push. So just to make sure that it's running, let's run this again locally. And did I? What? Did I save it? Yes, I did.
Looks like it's still doing something, I think.
Oh, yeah, it is. Let me close the tab and do that again. There it is. I'm colorblinded, so it has to be a really different color, otherwise I won't see it. So now that I have that, I'm gonna again upload this to my container registry, just like the way I did before. Well, actually I need to tag it again. So we're gonna be tagging what? Come on. I'm going to do that in a notepad.
You want one or do you want two?
Two. But it seems that it's only the terminal that is giving me. Am I on the right app service? I'm on a terminal on my other window. did the tagging. I'm only looking to see if it was done correctly. Yep, I'm gonna be doing the push. So yeah, I did it on another terminal. So I pushed the 2.0. So if I go back here to my container registry, I don't know if I close that up. Let's look for it again. So repo. So there it is. Now I have my two tags.
And it goes to staging, right?
Exactly. So now I'm still in staging, and if I go to the container settings, I'm gonna be setting up and I'm going to be grabbing the my tag number 2. Azure Container Registry, Web Apps for Container can integrate with Container Registry so that if I turn on continuous deployment, what it would do is that every time I push a container on the registry, it will deploy automatically. I don't have that set up right now, but you can integrate that to even facilitate that. So I'm going to be deploying this new version. So if I go to, what's this staging? Well, I can just go to overview. So there it is. So now I have my staging environment with a new version, and I have my production environment with the other version. So the staging environment allows you to have your own FQDN so that when you deploy that, you can go ahead and just test it out. But another nice feature is what I was mentioning, that is called testing in production. So here I can see that right now, when I hit production, all my traffic goes just to this instance. So let's say that I want to route only 5% of the traffic to my new version to test it out, and the rest of it I'm going to leave it that will go to production. Something they don't like. Yeah. So let's just refresh. Let's do that again. Okay, so this is my production URL, but I'm going to be opening developer tools because who doesn't like developer tools? Okay, so I'm going to be hitting this, and I can see that, well, it hit the actual production slot, and I can see that when I did that, it creates a cookie. The cookie has a value that is created when the first time that I hit the URL. It gave me a testing in production mix of 91, and what this does is that every time I, subsequent hits will still hit that. We'll still hit that same production slot. So, and just for the sake of testing this, I said that below 5%, so I'm gonna give it just a setup of 1. And if I hit it, I'm hitting the other deployment slot. I'm simulating that I was ranked between that 5%. Another thing that you could do, and if you notice here, it also creates, within the cookie, creates this MS routing name. and with the name of the actual slot. So one thing that you could do is, let me delete the cookie. And if you want to make sure that you're going to be hitting a specific slot, regardless of the weight that you have set up, because let's say that you have an application that is always needs to hit the production version because you're going to be doing testing or automatic testing or monitoring or whatever. You can set up, you can use the MS routing name, and you can, if you do an equals to self, that will always hit production. Or if you, if it's not production and it's any of the other slots, you just change the name to, let's say, stage. Of course, I'll need to delete the cookie again. That will also always hit stage.
Get a refresh there. Why does the worker interface label change?
Oh, that's true. I think it must be that, let's see, do we have one instance that is still executing some tests, some running? Yeah. I think there's, how many instances do I have? Well, I didn't want it to move this, so let me. Yeah, I have two. So one of those instances is still executing the background. So what the actual thing that it does is just create a thread, and it's doing a factorial only. So it means one of the instances is probably executing that. So if you stop that work,
So it's still single instance for staging, because staging didn't scale up.
well, the thing is, since it's running on the app service plan, when you scale, the metric was set up for the average percentage CPU usage. So it doesn't matter that it's staging the one that you hit. Since staging is also running within the same app service plan, it means that the CPU of the app service plan is being exercised. So that's why it's going to scale.
That's actually kind of interesting, because I thought the slots were for CI/CD.
Yes.
But a lot of that, if you've really got say a big implementation,
Yeah.
for an enterprise, then you're going to be using that for the QA, which you wouldn't be.
No. Yeah. So you wouldn't use. So even though I named the slot staging, that doesn't mean that you will use this production as your staging or QA environment. For that, you should use a separate environment.
Yeah, and you can make a separate service, and
Exactly.
the slots will talk across
on a
services.
separate environment. But once you want to deploy it in production, still, instead of just overriding production slot, it is still recommended to have a separate slot, do the deployment there, still test it out, and then do the switch. And how do we do that? When you hit the swap button, what that will do is.
Is this to kind of simulate like a blue-green deployment? Is that the idea?
Yeah.
Okay.
Here what I'm doing is setting up the it's going to tell you what the source is. In this case, the stage. I only have that one, and which one I'm going to replace. In this case, production. I haven't gone through all of the setups of web apps, but when you set up your application, you can have settings for each slot, but also you can pin settings to specific slots. So let's say if you have a connection string that you want the staging slot to always point to staging, a database staging, which is not production.
I guess my point was, I feel like you're leading yourself into over-provisioning if you've got a slot that's really going to be used very little within that same service.
Yes, well, I don't see it as over provisioning, because it's not gonna be creating a new app service or app service plan. It's gonna be using the same infrastructure that you already are leveraging, and it's going to give you another slot for you to have just a version for you to deploy on that environment and you to realize whether that works or not. And if that works, you can just hit swap. And what that will do is just switch the pointers. And the good thing about that is that, because it happens, right? You're sure that it's worked, 0 bugs, but when it's running in production, then something happens, right? And if you want to fall back to the previous version, you don't have to redeploy again. You just only go and click swap again, and the changes at the end is changed, so it will be very fast to do a rollback under that scenario.
For the swap, is it seamless? Like, would a user ever see that, or would it be that the main one is up until the next one comes and kind of swaps?
Yeah,
so there would never be any downtime in a swap.
There won't be any downtime. So I'm not sure why it's taking that long. It should be fairly fast, actually. Let me refresh this. Oh, there it is.
The practical example can be, let's say, for example, you have certain performance improvement. You already tested everywhere, but without working with your production database, there is no way to be 100% confident. So you're kind of creating this slot, you're separating it with 95.5, testing it, making sure users do not complain, and then swap.
Yep. Yeah, you can do, and you can do 5, and then if you want to increment the percentage just to make sure. Again, there are some customers that they do that. So you deploy an environment, you do the splitting, and then you start increasing the load, the weight on one of those slots until you just leave one instead of the other. So now I did the change. Let's see what I have here under the developer tools. So there are no cookies. Oh, but I'm in stage. So you can see that it did make the swap. So let's go. Where was production? That was here. Just to make sure of that, let's delete this. There it is. And I don't think, since I don't have any separation, any weighting, there's no cookie created for this. So every time I hit, it's still going to be hitting this instance. So
can you automate the increase of that? Like, so like if you're using the 2 slots to do like a canary deployment and you wanted to start with 5, but progressively increase them and automatically swap them, like in a pipeline, could you
you can
set where it...
Yeah, all the settings and things that I'm doing on the portal, those can be done automatically through CLI, PowerShell, or hitting the REST endpoint.
Alright, so you could have like specific not thresholds, but like times. So like on Monday, go 5%, Tuesday, go and automatically up the percentages until you can fully swap them.
You will have to set that up on your pipeline, but yeah, you can do that. So you wouldn't do that. You wouldn't set that up on the portal. Mm-hmm. It's more of the CI/CD that you're leveraging. Yeah. Exactly. And that was, I think, that was basically it on the demo. One of the things that is important that I was mentioning is the containers. The application settings. Here's where I can set up environment variables and connection strings so that you don't have to hard code those or set those up on a config file, that once you do a git check-in or something like that you will have those credentials all over the place. You can set up securely on the on this section on the app services. But you can also leverage something that within Azure called Key Vault, and I'm not sure if you're familiar with that. Azure Key Vault allows you to store secrets, certificates, and you can use that use the Key Vault injecting the values for those keys directly through here. There is this is a reference. We have this documented. So what you will do is on the value of the setting, you will be placing this at Microsoft.keyvault, and then you can pass either it's a full FQDN that points directly to the specific key that you're looking for, or you can set them up by name specifically, which is the name of the vault, the secret, and the version of the secret, because in Key Vault you can version also the keys and the values that you have as well.
You guys have integrations with HashiCorp Vault?
App Services does not integrate with HashiCorp Vault. I think there are other services that may do, probably, because I've read about integration with Key Vault, but not specifically for App Services. And so, as I mentioned, as you can see on the either setting application settings or connection strings, you have something that is called deployment slot setting. What this will do is that you can, as I mentioned, you can pin a specific setup, like say a connection string, so that when you do the swap, you don't want those configurations to swap. You can pin those setups as well per slot, so that will mean that, let's say the connection string to a database, the staging slot will always point to the staging database, but if you change any of the other setups or configurations, if you do a swap, those will be swapped as well. So you can have identify which of those are going to be swap or are going to be staged to a specific slot. And as well, you can have custom domains. You can integrate with different identity providers. You can also use Azure Active Directory. When you're doing this, you can have the actions that you can take is either allow anonymous request. What this will do is it won't enforce itself the authentication. You'll have to set that up or trigger that up from your application itself. Or you can just set up that no one is able to log in until they log with Azure Active Directory. And if you do it like this, if your application doesn't have authentication at all will be managed by App Services by itself. Before you reach the site, it will see if you are authenticated, and if you're not, it will send you to the provider that you requested. So in this case, before you hit the site, it will prompt you with a login, the usual login. And once you do the login, the token and the information from the login will be passed on to the application on a header value. So if you have claims and things like that on your token, those will be passed on to the application. You can use custom domains. I'm not going to save this because it's going to break my deployment. You can set up custom domain, TLS settings. This is one of the most important things, which is networking. And you can integrate, this is where you will set up integration with your VNet. In order for, let's say, if you have a web application that you want to also have connectivity with services that you have either on Azure on a VNet or on premises, but you are depending on ExpressRoute or site-to-site or VPN connection, you can set up that here as well. And that's, I think that's basically it. I don't know if you have any questions.
So that VNet, so if there is a VPN connection with our premises database or something, that will be available in application.
Yeah, so if you integrate with a specific VNet and that VNet has access, within the VNet you have access, you will be able to reach out.
So if an application needs to access our premises data, then that's
yes. Now it depends on obviously your bandwidth and if you have site-to-site or ExpressRoute, that will be the speed that you will achieve with that connection. But yeah, you will be able to connect.
Two questions regarding security. When you said that we can use authentication directly, when application gets back the token, then this token sends with a header every time as a part of the request to the application.
Yeah.
Does it have just a token, one-time token, like for a certain period of time, or what about the expiration? Or does it have this access token, refresh token that you have to periodically refresh? And who takes care of this?
No, I believe so if you're doing that you're not able to do anything but you're enforced to log on since the beginning, that the refresh of the token and everything will be handled by Azure. So before you reach the site, it will check out the token and the validity, if it's valid or not, if it needs to be refreshed. So it will handle that for you. And I don't have that open, but there's a link specifically for that tells how to set up all that. Whether if you want app service to manage all the authentication, or if you want to integrate that with your application as well, we have a documentation for that. One last thing that I almost forgot is that, let me go back to the presentation. I know that it's late, so I just want to jump to something that is called App Service Environment. So I show you the App Service itself and how you can set that up. Now there's another version of the App Service which is called App Service Environment, and that is used when you want to set that up, everything that you saw, but within a VNet and without access from the internet, from outside in. The App Service Environment is a lot more expensive than the other one because it needs to deploy a lot of infrastructure on your VNet. However, if you want to make sure that it's highly secure, it's within your own VNet, and it's that development model, but with extra security, you can leverage app service environments. And we have architecture documentation on how to set up a PCI DSS compliant environment, leveraging app service environment and Key Vault and other security features as well.
Like cloud.
Yeah, it's similar to VPC on AWS.
I wouldn't know. I'm not sure. I'm not that familiar with AWS. We took a web page. Oh, anyway.
Probably the concept is the same.
Probably,
create some kind of environment where you can hack all your servers, but they still will be kind of secured.
It's within the
access and VPN maybe to your own traffic.
Correct. Yeah, because as you saw on web apps, I mean, the purpose for that is to have something on the internet exposed or publicly available, not exposed but publicly available. But if you don't want even that to have that, that's when you leverage app service environment. And I think that's, well, this is one of the examples that I mentioned using Traffic Manager and using the app service environment internally within your own Azure virtual network with an internal load balancer. And here the applications are talking to each other using VNet peering that probably Andres, when he does the talk on networking, will explain that on how to set that up. VNet peering is a way to connect two VNets one another without having to use VPN or Express router or anything like that.
Does that web apps have the zone redundancy like other app services, other services in Azure?
That's a good question. I'm not sure that App Services has support for availability zones. That's the first time that I get asked that. No, I'm not. I don't think we have availability zones yet for app services. Yep. Because when you're using availability zones, you need to have also a standard load balancer and also a standard IP, which will allow you to use the same IP on different zones. Yep. So I think that's all. Thank you.
Thank you.